They set boundaries early and silently because they've learned that protecting their peace starts long before someone tries to cross a line. Older women understand that boundaries aren't something you announce, argue about, or justify to anyone. They come from an inner decision that says, this is what I allow, this is what I don't, and I don't need to explain it. That level of clarity doesn't come overnight. It comes from years of giving too much, saying yes when they wanted to say no, and realizing that self-respect isn't loud, it's consistent, it's calm, and it's firm. They've lived enough life to recognize patterns early. They can spot the person who takes more than they give, the situation that drains more energy than it's worth, and the conversation that's headed toward disrespect. They don't wait for things to get bad before setting limits. They draw the line the moment they feel their energy tightening or their intuition nudging them. That's why their boundaries look effortless. It's not because they don't care, it's because they learned to care differently. They no longer manage other people's reactions or emotions. They manage their own capacity. They know where their emotional bandwidth ends, and they act on that knowledge unapologetically. When something doesn't feel right to them, they don't debate it in their mind for days. They don't rehearse what to say. They don't prepare a speech. They simply shift their behavior. They respond slower. They pull back. They stop over-explaining. They stop making themselves available to situations that don't align with who they're becoming. And they do this quietly, without drama or a performance. Silence becomes part of their boundary system, not the silent treatment meant to punish someone, but silence that protects their peace by refusing to engage where their presence is not valued. They've also mastered the art of saying no without guilt. They don't attach a story to their no. They don't soften it with excuses or apologies. They've learned that every yes that violates their own needs becomes a withdrawal from their self-respect. So they guard their yes carefully. They understand that time, attention, and emotional investment are currencies, and they only spend them where there is alignment, respect, and reciprocity. That's why their relationships, friendships, and daily routines feel lighter. Their boundaries filter out what doesn't belong before it grows into a problem. And because their boundaries are set early, the people in their life rarely test them. They don't have to repeat themselves. Their actions communicate the standard. Their consistency reinforces it. Their energy says what their words don't need to. People learn very quickly that access to them is earned, and keeping that access requires respect. They don't chase after people who pull away, and they don't cling to situations that no longer support their well-being. They walk away early before resentment builds, before they lose themselves, before they start shrinking to make someone else comfortable. They set these boundaries not to block others out, but to let the right people in. People who appreciate clarity, who value their presence, who respect emotional space. When you set boundaries early, you teach others how to treat you, and older women know that better than anyone. They've learned that boundaries are not walls, they're doors, and they decide who walks through them and who doesn't. They observe before they respond because life has already shown them how much chaos comes from reacting too quickly. Older women understand that the first version of a situation is rarely the full truth. People present fragments, emotions distort facts, and assumptions fill in gaps that don't need to be filled. So instead of jumping in with judgment, correction, or defense, they pause, they watch, they listen, they let the moment breathe before they decide how to show up in it. That pause isn't hesitation, it's wisdom earned through experiences where reacting fast created problems that patience could have prevented. With time, they've learned that emotional reactions often reflect temporary feelings, not long-term reality. They've seen how anger settles, how disappointment softens, and how fear exaggerates. So they don't let fleeting emotions dictate permanent decisions. They give themselves room to understand the situation from the inside out. They pay attention to tone, timing, patterns, and intentions. They notice what's being said and what's being avoided. They notice the inconsistencies that others gloss over. This observational mindset allows them to respond with clarity instead of confusion. It makes them steady in moments when others are impulsive. They've also learned that not everything deserves a response. Sometimes silence communicates more truth than words ever could. When someone speaks from frustration, insecurity, or projection, they notice it. They don't absorb it. They don't make it their responsibility to fix someone's emotional state. They allow the person to express themselves without feeling the need to match their intensity. They've outgrown the need to win arguments or prove their point. They choose peace over power struggles because they understand that not every battle is worth the emotional investment. Observation gives them the gift of choosing wisely. This habit of observing first also protects them from manipulation. They've lived through enough situations to know when someone is being performative, when someone is exaggerating to gain sympathy, or when someone is trying to shift blame. They notice the subtle shifts in body language, the way someone's story changes over time, the emotional hooks hidden in certain phrases. They don't call these things out immediately. They simply take note, adjust their expectations, and respond with boundaries instead of confrontation. People underestimate them because they don't react immediately, but that quietness is exactly what keeps them in control of their own emotional world. They observe themselves too. They watch how their own body reacts to tension, how their energy shifts around certain people, and how their mood changes in specific environments. They pay attention to their intuition, not in a mystical way, but in a grounded, self-aware way. They've learned that their instincts are often more accurate than their overthinking. When something feels off, they don't dismiss it. They let the feeling exist, gather more information, and then align their actions with what they've learned. This inner observation keeps them aligned with their values and prevents them from betraying themselves for the sake of maintaining appearances or pleasing others. Through observing first, they create emotional space between stimulus and response. That space is where self-control lives. It's where confidence grows. It's where they decide whether to step forward, step back, or stand still. They no longer operate on autopilot or allow external pressures to push them into actions they'll regret. They respond based on intention, not impulse. They've learned that power isn't in speaking first, it's in understanding fully. And older women carry that understanding with them in every conversation, every conflict, and every connection they choose to maintain. They invest in emotional independence because they've lived long enough to understand that relying on someone else for stability is the fastest way to lose it. Older women know that people can love you deeply and still disappoint you, support you and still leave, show up for you and still have their own limits. So instead of placing their emotional well-being in someone else's hands, they build it within themselves. They learn to create a life that feels full even when no one is cheering them on, validating their choices, or giving them the reassurance they once thought they needed. That internal steadiness becomes their anchor, especially in moments when life feels unpredictable. They've learned that emotional independence isn't loneliness. It's not about rejecting connection or pretending they don't need anyone. It's about knowing they can function, think clearly, and make grounded decisions with or without someone's approval. They don't crumble when someone withdraws affection or changes direction. They feel the loss, but they don't lose themselves in it. They understand that emotions are weather patterns, not permanent climates, and because of that, they've stopped letting temporary storms dictate their identity. They allow themselves to feel deeply, but they don't outsource their emotional balance to anyone else. Over time, they've built rituals and habits that feed them from the inside. Quiet mornings, walks alone, hobbies that bring joy, routines that keep them centered. These aren't distractions. They're investments. Investments that cultivate self-trust, because the more they experience their own resilience, the less they fear being alone. They know they can comfort themselves after a hard day, encourage themselves when doubt shows up, and redirect their own thinking when things get overwhelming. That skill comes from years of navigating life's ups and downs without expecting someone else to carry their emotional load for them. They also stop tying their identity to roles that once defined them. At some point, they realize they're more than the caretaker, the partner, the friend, the mediator, the supporter. They begin to understand who they are outside of what they do for others. That shift alone strengthens their emotional independence because they no longer allow their value to be measured by how much they give. Instead, they start valuing themselves simply for being.